The afternoon sun had already begun its slow descent over Lagos when Megan Adeyemi arrived at Chibondo's rooftop apartment in Lekki Phase 1, late, as was her custom, fashionably so. The gathering was already in full swing, the kind of easy, warm Saturday brunch that only close friends could pull off. Jollof rice steaming in a big pot on the table, small chops being passed around on trays, Afrobeats drifting from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner, and the sound of people who genuinely liked each other filling the air. Megan was 28, the kind of woman who walked into a room and rearranged it without trying. She had her mother's cheekbones and her father's quiet stubbornness, and she wore both well. She worked in brand communications at a mid-sized firm on the island, which meant she was articulate, perceptive, and very good at reading people. She scanned the rooftop the way she always did, quickly, instinctively, and that was when she saw him. He was standing near the railing, holding a bottle of Amstel, listening to something Chibondo was saying with the particular expression of someone who was genuinely amused. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed simply in a white kaftan and dark trousers. There was nothing flashy about him. He wasn't performing for anyone. She told herself she wasn't staring. Chibondo, who missed nothing, appeared at her elbow within 60 seconds. "You just got here and you are already looking at Andrew," Chibondo said, smiling into her cup of zobo. "I was looking at the jollof," Megan replied. "The jollof is behind you." Megan turned around. It was. She pressed her lips together and said nothing. Andrew Okafor was 31 and had grown up in Enugu before his family relocated to Lagos during his secondary school years. He worked in project management at a construction and infrastructure firm on the mainland. Solid, unglamorous work that he took genuine pride in. He was the kind of man who remembered details. What you said you liked, what you said you were worried about, what you said in passing 3 weeks ago that you had already forgotten. His best friend, Jaden, was always telling him this quality would either make him a great husband or an insufferable one. He noticed Megan before Chibondo introduced them. It was hard not to. But it was only when she opened her mouth, when she made a dry, precise comment about the state of Lagos traffic that made the whole group laugh, that he felt something settle in him like a decision. Chibondo made the introduction with barely concealed delight. "Megan, this is Andrew. Andrew, Megan, you're welcome." "You're welcome for what?" Andrew asked. "You'll understand later," Chibondo said and walked away. They talked for the rest of the afternoon. It began with the easy, tested subjects: work, the Lagos heat, the particular madness of the Third Mainland Bridge, and moved slowly into deeper water. By the time the sun was completely gone and the rooftop had thinned to only a handful of people, they were still standing at the same railing where Megan had first seen him, and the Amstel he'd been holding when she arrived had long since been abandoned and forgotten. She liked that he listened the way he did, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually listening. She liked that he had opinions and wasn't shy about them, but that he could also be wrong and know it without making a scene. He was grounded in a way she hadn't expected, in a way that felt, for lack of a better word, safe. He liked that she was sharp. He liked that she challenged everything he said, not out of combativeness, but out of genuine curiosity. He liked that she laughed easily and without self-consciousness, a full, real laugh that she didn't try to make smaller or more polished. Before she left that night, she gave him her number without him asking. She said it casually, like an afterthought, already moving toward the door. "In case you want to continue the argument about whether Wizkid's Essence era was his peak." He looked down at the number in his phone and smiled. "It wasn't his peak," she said, and left. They texted for 2 weeks, then began calling. He drove to the island on a Wednesday evening with no occasion and no plan, and they sat in a small spot on the waterfront eating pepper soup and talking until the place closed around them. She took him to her favorite suya spot the following Saturday, a hole in the wall in Surulere where the meat was thick and the onions were always fresh, and she was pleased and a little surprised when he didn't complain about crossing the bridge. 3 months after Chibondo's brunch, sitting in that same suya spot, Andrew set down his stick and looked at her for a moment with that quiet, deliberate expression she had come to recognize, the one that meant he was about to say something he had already thought through carefully. "Megan, I want us to be together, properly, not this in-between thing." She looked at him for a long moment. She had known it was coming. She had been waiting for it, if she was honest with herself, for weeks. "Define properly," she said. "You're my girlfriend. I'm your boyfriend. We're building something." She smiled slowly, trying to keep her face neutral and failing entirely. "You are very serious on a Wednesday." "I'm serious every day of the week." She picked up her stick of suya. "Fine," she said, as if she were agreeing to something minor. "But I'm not changing my plans for a man who thinks Wizkid peaked before Essence. There's nothing to negotiate." But she was smiling, and he was smiling. And outside the small spot, the Lagos night carried on around them, loud and indifferent, and completely unbothered by the fact that something quiet and important had just begun. 4 years passed the way good years do, not slowly and not without difficulty, but with a fullness that made time feel well spent. They had their arguments, the kind that came from two people who were strong-willed and knew what they wanted. There were stretches of distance, weeks when work consumed everything, and they moved past each other like ships. But they always came back. They always chose each other again. Andrew proposed on a Sunday, not in a restaurant, not in public. He did it at her parents' house in Bagada, in the sitting room after lunch, with her mother pretending to watch television and failing entirely, and her father sitting with a deliberate stillness that suggested he already knew. He got down on one knee with the ring her own mother helped him choose, a thin gold band with a single stone, not ostentatious, exactly right for her. And he said her name once, quietly, like a question. Megan looked at him for a long time, long enough that her mother made a small, anxious sound from the sofa. "Yes," she said, "obviously yes." Her mother exhaled loudly. Her father stood up and shook Andrew's hand with both of his, and that was that. They were married 4 months later in a ceremony in Lagos that was exactly as elaborate as Megan's mother had always imagined, and exactly as warm as Andrew's mother had always prayed for. The reception was loud and beautiful and went on longer than planned, as Lagos celebrations always do. And when it was finally over and they were alone, they sat in the hotel room in the quiet that follows big events. And Megan rested her head on his shoulder and said nothing. And Andrew said nothing either. And it was enough. They both had agreed that they didn't want kids yet. They both wanted to grow their careers, and that was enough. Everything was perfect. Always before we continue, do tell us where you are watching from. I love to see how far these amazing stories travel. Enjoy. 6 months into their marriage, the kind of ordinary happiness that Andrew and Megan had built together was interrupted, pleasantly at first, by news from his office. He had been with Cornerstone Infrastructure for 6 years. 6 years of early mornings and late submissions, of projects that ran over budget and had to be salvaged, of difficult clients and longer than necessary site visits to Abuja and Port Harcourt. 6 years of watching colleagues who had joined after him climb past him and choosing, each time, to keep his head down and do the work anyway. His mother had told him, more than once, that patience was its own kind of strategy. He had believed her, mostly. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. His boss, Mr. Babatunde Kuka, a compact, precise man from Ibadan, who rarely wasted words, asked him to come to his office at the end of the day. Andrew sat across from him and waited. "I've been watching you for 3 years," Mr. Coker said, without preamble. "The way you handled the Abuja Road project, the Echo Bridge assessment, the mess with the Apapa contractors last year that nobody wanted to touch. I noticed." He paused. "You're being promoted to Senior Project Director. The letter will be on your desk tomorrow." Andrew drove home in a stillness that was very close to disbelief. He called his mother before he called anyone else. She wept quietly on the phone and said God is not a man that he should lie, which was what she always said when something good happened, and which always made him feel, without fail, like a boy again in the best possible way. Then he called Jaden, who shouted so loudly that Andrew had to hold the phone away from his ear. When he got home and told Megan, she dropped the spatula she was holding and crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and held his face in both her hands. "I told you, didn't I tell you?" "You told me." 6 years, Andrew. They finally saw what I've been seeing since that first evening on Chibundo's rooftop. He laughed. "You saw my career potential from across a rooftop." "I saw everything from across that rooftop," she said simply, and kissed him. 3 months after his promotion, Megan turned 32. Andrew had been planning it for 6 weeks. He had a notebook, an actual physical notebook, which Jaden had found enormously funny, in which he had written down, over the course of their relationship, every small thing she had ever mentioned wanting. A weekend in Zanzibar, the particular perfume she'd stopped buying because she said it was a luxury, dinner at the restaurant on the island she'd pointed at through a car window once, 18 months ago, saying someday. A video call with her university roommate who now lived in Toronto and whom she missed more than she admitted. He did all of it. The Zanzibar trip was booked for the following weekend, the itinerary printed and placed inside a card. The perfume was wrapped and waiting. The reservation at the restaurant was for that evening, a table by the window overlooking the water, with her closest friends already there when they arrived. Her Toronto friend appeared on a tablet screen propped at the table, slightly pixelated and 20 minutes late due to time zones, but there. Megan sat at that table and looked around at the faces she loved and said nothing for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful in the way voices become when a person is trying not to cry in public. "Andrew," she said. "You are so much trouble." He smiled at his plate. "Eat your food." It was, by any measure, a perfect evening. Nobody could say exactly when things began to shift. That was the nature of it. It didn't happen all at once. It accumulated, the way rust does, slowly and at first invisibly, until one day you look and the damage is already deep. Megan began coming home late. The first few times, there was a reason: a campaign deadline, a client presentation that ran long, a crisis at work that couldn't wait. Andrew understood this. He worked late himself. He knew what demanding jobs looked like from the inside. He kept her food warm and asked no questions. But the pattern continued. 3 weeks became 6. The explanations remained the same. "Work has been a lot. You know how it gets. I'm exhausted." And they were not untrue exactly. Megan was not a liar by nature, but something in the texture of the evenings had changed. She came home distracted. Her presence in the house somehow reduced, as though part of her had stayed behind wherever she'd been. She fell asleep quickly, where before she had always been the one still talking when he was already half gone. Andrew watched all of this and said nothing. He turned it over in his mind in the early mornings when she was still asleep, and in the idle minutes on site visits, and late at night when the apartment was quiet. He was not a man who panicked easily, but he was a man who paid attention, and something was sitting wrongly in him. He noticed that he had stopped fully believing the explanations without being able to say precisely when he had stopped. The one thing that had not changed was their intimacy. That part of their marriage remained intact, warm, present, real. He held on to this. He told himself it meant something, that a woman who had grown distant in every other way would not still reach for him in the dark if something fundamental had broken. He told himself this many times. Then came the Tuesday evening that he would replay for a long time afterwards. Andrew arrived home from work at his usual hour. The front door was unlocked, which was not unusual. Megan sometimes left it that way when she was expecting a delivery. He stepped inside, dropped his keys on the side table, and walked into the sitting room. Megan was on the sofa. Beside her, at a careful distance, a distance that announced itself, that was its own kind of statement, sat a man Andrew had never seen. He was well dressed, perhaps 35, with the kind of easy posture that belonged to someone comfortable in other people's homes. There was a small distance between them. Nothing had been disturbed, no guilt visibly present. And yet, Andrew stood in the doorway for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. "Andrew," Megan said, with the lightness of someone who had anticipated this moment and prepared for it. "This is Emeka. We used to work together at my first job, before I moved to the current firm. We bumped into each other at the ShopRite in Oniru last week, and I said he should come by." Emeka stood and extended a hand. "Bros, good to meet you. I've heard plenty about you." Andrew shook the hand. "Good things, I hope," which was the only thing that came out. The visit ended shortly after that. Emeka left with the ease of someone with nowhere pressing to be, and Megan walked him to the door, while Andrew stood in the kitchen with a glass of water he didn't drink. She came back and moved around the kitchen with the comfortable efficiency of a woman in her own home, asking him about his day, whether she wanted him to warm the egusi soup she'd made the other day, if he'd heard back from the Abuja contractor. He answered each question. He ate the food she warmed. He watched her move through the apartment, and he thought, this could be nothing. This is probably nothing. But he did not call Jaden that evening to say so. He called Jaden 3 days later on a Friday evening, sitting in his car outside the office building because he hadn't been ready to go inside yet. Jaden Eze was Andrew's oldest friend. They had met in JSS2 in Government Secondary School in Lagos and had been brothers in all but blood ever since. Jaden worked in digital marketing and was, by his own proud admission, allergic to unnecessary suffering. He had been married for 2 years to a woman named Sadi, and he approached most problems in life with a certainty that Andrew had always found both maddening and oddly comforting. Andrew told him everything: the late nights, the distraction, the subtle distance, the man on the sofa. Jaden was quiet for a moment, unusually so. "She gave you any real explanation for the late nights?" Andrew said. "Work. She keeps saying work. And you've seen nothing? No messages? Nothing?" "Andrew," there was something impatient in Jaden's voice now. "How long has this been going on? 6 or 7 weeks. 6 or 7 weeks of this, and a man you don't know is sitting in your house, and you're asking me if it's suspicious?" "I'm not asking if it's suspicious. I'm asking—" Andrew stopped. He wasn't sure what he was asking. "I'll tell you what I think," Jaden said, his voice settling into the particular register he used when he had already decided something. "I think you already know what's happening. I think the problem is that you don't want to know." Andrew said nothing. "And I think," Jaden continued, his voice settling into the particular register he used when he had already decided something, "I think that you can't just sit there and take it." "So what are you saying?" Jaden's answer came without hesitation. "If she's doing what it looks like she's doing, you don't have to be the only one sitting with it. You give back what you are given." Andrew stared through the windscreen at the line of cars moving slowly on the road ahead. He had not come to Jaden for this answer, but he had come to Jaden, and this was the answer Jaden had given him. And some part of him, the part that was tired of carrying something heavy without a name, heard it and did not immediately push it away. "Jaden," Andrew said, "there's a new place that opened in Ikeja. Nice spot, good music. Come out tomorrow night. No pressure, just come." Andrew turned the key in the ignition. "I'll think about it," he said. But they both knew what that meant. He went out on the Saturday. He told himself as he dressed that he was only going to clear his head, that it was only drinks with Jaden, that nothing had to happen. He believed this with varying degrees of conviction at different points in the evening. The club was the kind of place that made clarity difficult by design.
Dark enough to lose yourself in, loud enough to make thought exhausting, busy enough that you became briefly anonymous in the crowd. Jaden had already gotten a table by the time Andrew arrived. There were 2 bottles of Hennessy, a bucket of ice, and the kind of broad, uncomplicated smile on Jaden's face that Andrew recognized as the expression of a man who had already decided how the night would go. "Relax," Jaden said, pouring. "Just be here." Andrew sat down and picked up the glass. The woman's name was Timmy. She was a friend of someone at the next table, easy to talk to, and she laughed at the right moment and asked the right questions, and was in every surface way exactly the kind of company that a man in pain could fall toward without much resistance. Andrew knew this. He saw it clearly even as it was happening. He made the choice anyway, not in a moment of madness, but with a terrible, quiet deliberateness that he would not understand for some time. He called Jaden the following morning and said simply, "It happened." Jaden said, "Good, now you're even." Andrew sat with that word, even, and found that it felt nothing like what he had expected. The birthday surprise happened on a Saturday, 9 days after the night at the club. Andrew had woken that morning with the particular heaviness that had become his companion over the past week, a weight that sat just below the chest, not quite guilt, not quite grief, but something in the space between the two. He had gone through the motions mechanically. Shower, coffee, the news on his phone, the distant sounds of Megan already awake in the kitchen. They had been moving around each other carefully since the Tuesday with Emeka, not coldly, but with a kind of deliberate gentleness that was its own form of distance. He came downstairs expecting an ordinary Saturday. The front door burst open instead. "Happy birthday!" The sound hit him before he could process it. Voices, many of them, familiar ones, flooding in from the doorway and from the corridor beyond. His colleagues from Cornerstone, his friends from secondary school. Chibundo, already emotional before anything had even happened. His cousin Dimeji, who lived in Ibadan and had apparently driven up the night before and stayed in a hotel. His mother. His mother. She was standing near the back of the group in a deep burgundy ashoke, her handbag held in front of her with both hands, watching him with the expression she had worn at his graduation and at his wedding. That particular look of a woman who had prayed something into existence and was now watching it breathe. Andrew stood at the bottom of the staircase and could not move. "Your wife called us," his mother said simply, answering the question he hadn't asked yet. "She paid for everything. She called me first." He turned to look at Megan, who was standing to the side of the room with her arms folded and her chin slightly raised in the way she stood when she was trying to look unbothered and was not entirely succeeding. She was wearing a yellow dress he liked. She met his eyes and shrugged with one shoulder. "You thought I didn't notice that your birthday was coming," she said. He opened his mouth and found nothing there. Then he cried. Everyone comforted him because they thought he was overwhelmed by the love, but he was crying because he had betrayed the woman that had simply been planning his birthday party. He silently decided to take it to his grave, but the truth has a funny way of always creeping in. The afternoon moved the way the best ones do, without urgency, with food and noise, and the layered warmth of people who love each other gathered in one place. His mother sat in the best chair and received greetings as was her right. Dimeji held court near the drinks table and told exaggerated stories about their childhood that Andrew could not entirely disprove. Music played at the right volume, loud enough to fill the rooms, low enough that people could still talk. Andrew moved through it all with a smile on his face and something breaking quietly underneath it. Because it was in the kitchen that he saw Emeka. Not sitting on a sofa this time, not at a careful explanatory distance. Emeka was standing at the stove in an apron, directing Megan's younger cousin with the calm authority of someone entirely in his element. He was tasting something from a wooden spoon. He was laughing at something someone had said. He was unmistakably the person responsible for the extraordinary spread of food that had been appearing on the dining table all afternoon. The peppered goat meat, the native soup, the fried plantain that Andrew's mother had already declared the best she tasted outside of Enugu. Andrew stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at this man. Chibundo appeared at his shoulder. "He's a chef," she said quietly, with no preamble. "Private dining, events, that kind of thing. Megan found his contact and booked him weeks ago. That's who he is. Andrew did not respond. She brought your parents down from Enugu, Chibundo continued, her voice careful now. She called your mother 2 months ago, apparently. She coordinated everything, the travel, the hotel, all of it. She's been planning this since before her own birthday. Andrew's jaw tightened. She loves you, Chibundo said simply, and walked away. He went to the bathroom and locked the door and sat on the edge of the tub and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. In the room beyond, he could hear his mother laughing at something Dimedia had said, and the sound of it, easy, genuine, unchanged, did something to him that he wasn't prepared for. He stayed there for 4 minutes. Then he washed his face, unlocked the door, and went back to his birthday party. The weeks after the birthday were the strangest of his life. On the surface, nothing had changed. The party had been celebrated, the guests had gone home, his mother had flown back to Enugu with his father, who had arrived quietly as his father always did, and had held Andrew's hand for a long moment before leaving and said nothing, which was his father's way of saying everything. Life resumed its familiar shape. But inside Andrew, something had been permanently rearranged. He had made a terrible mistake. He understood this now with a clarity that the nights before the birthday had not given him. He had been afraid, and instead of naming the fear and bringing it to Megan, he had carried it to Jaden, who pointed it in the wrong direction, and he had followed it there. He had no evidence of betrayal. He had discomfort and anxiety and a man on a sofa, and he took those things and built a justification out of them because some part of him wanted to, because it was easier than asking the question directly. Emeka was a chef. He had been at the house because Megan was planning a birthday celebration. The late nights, he understood now, slowly, piecing it together, while the coordination, the phone calls to family, the logistics of getting his parents from Enugu without him finding out. She had been building something beautiful for him in secret, and he had burned something down. He thought about telling him. He composed the conversation in his head many times, in the car, in the early mornings, in the quiet after she fell asleep. Each version began the same way. Megan, there's something I have to tell you. Each version fell apart somewhere in the middle where her face would change, and he could not see past that. He was a coward. He knew this. He kept the knowledge and did nothing with it. He told himself it was once. He told himself that what she didn't know could not hurt her. He told himself these things and did not fully believe them and continued to tell them to himself anyway, which was perhaps the most damning thing of all. 4 months passed this way, uneasy and unspoken. Then the interns arrived. It was a Monday morning in March. Andrew was in the 3rd floor open office space at Cornerstone, standing at the printer waiting for a document, when his manager walked through with his small group of new faces, fresh graduates, early 20s, the slightly over-prepared look of people on their first day in a professional building. His manager was explaining the floor layout with the efficient detachment of someone who had done this many times. Andrew glanced up from the printer and stopped. He recognized her immediately, Temi, from the club, from that Saturday night, from the decision he had made and had been carrying quietly ever since. She was dressed professionally, carrying a notepad, scanning the office with the alert expression of someone trying to map a new environment quickly. She had not seen him yet. He looked away and collected his document from the printer tray. Then she saw him. He knew because he heard this small pause in her step, the almost interruption in the rhythm of the group moving past. He did not look up again, but he felt it. Temi's full name was Temilowa Adigboyeka. She had just completed her degree in civil engineering from Covenant University, 2nd class upper. She had mentioned it that night without bragging, just as a fact. And she had applied to Cornerstone through the official graduate program. She had not known where he worked. This was evident in the way she had looked at him from across the office, not with calculation, but with the startled expression of someone who had just stepped into a situation considerably more complicated than the one she had entered. Temi kept her distance that first week. He kept his. They exchanged exactly 2 pieces of communication, a brief professional nod in the corridor on Tuesday, and a short, unremarkable exchange at the coffee station on Thursday, where they both said something about the weather and moved on. Neither of them acknowledged anything. But Lagos is a city that does not leave room for secrets to stay comfortable for long. Temi had an uncle. His name was Mr. Adigboyeka, The same Mr. Adegboyeka who sat on Cornerstone's board of non-executive director and who had in fact been instrumental in establishing the graduate internship program through which Temi had been hired. He was a serious man, deeply traditional in the particular way of Yoruba patriarchs of his generation. Not cruel, but exacting, with a strong sense of how things ought to be. Temi saw Andrew and she thought might be playing a dirty game on her. Then she learned that he was a married man. He was married and he had cheated on his wife with her. Temi was a vengeful woman. She went to her uncle and told him everything. Andrew would never know exactly what she said or how she said it, but the conversation happened on a Wednesday evening, and by Thursday morning Mr. Adegboyeka had requested an urgent meeting with Mr. Coker. Andrew was called in at noon. He sat across from his boss and Mr. Adegboyeka and understood within the first 30 seconds that the conversation was not going to be about work. A married man, Mr. Adegboyeka said, with the measured quiet of genuine anger, pursuing a girl who was still writing her final examinations when this apparently occurred. "Sir, I am speaking." Andrew closed his mouth. Mr. Coker said nothing. He was looking at the surface of his desk with the expression of a man deeply disappointed by an outcome he could not have predicted and now had to manage. "My niece did not come to this company to be made uncomfortable by someone who should know better," Mr. Adegboyeka continued. "She came here to work. She worked hard for this opportunity, and now she cannot walk through the office without this sitting over her." He paused. "I have spoken with the board." Andrew's termination letter was prepared by close of business that day. He sat in his car in the Cornerstone car park for a long time. He thought about the 6 years. He thought about Mr. Coker's voice saying, "I noticed just months ago in this same building." He thought about his mother in her burgundy asoke, standing at the back of the room with her handbag held in both hands. Then he drove home. Megan was in the sitting room when he arrived, her laptop open on the coffee table, halfway through what looked like a campaign deck. She looked up when he came in, reading his face the way she had always been able to do, and closed the laptop. "Andrew, what happened?" He sat down in the chair across from her, not beside her, across from her. The distance was not lost on her. He told her everything. He told it without performance and without the softening that fear might have encouraged, because she deserved better than that, and he knew it. He told her about the weeks of suspicion, about Jaden's advice, about the Saturday at the club. He told her about Temi. He told her about the internship, the uncle, the office, the letter. He spoke for perhaps 10 minutes without stopping, and when he finished, the room was very quiet. Megan had not moved. She was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not yet, but something prior to anger, something rawer than it, the expression of a person reassembling what they thought was true. "The late nights," she said slowly. "I know. I was planning your birthday. I know that now. Emeka is a chef. I know. And you knew all of this," her voice caught. She pressed her lips together and started again. "You knew all of this and you still?" "Megan, don't." The word came out quietly, which was worse than if she had shouted it. "Don't say my name like that." She stood up from the sofa. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him, looking out at the street below where the evening was beginning, the hawker still moving, the sound of a generator starting up somewhere nearby. Ordinary Lagos, carrying on, indifferent as always. "I didn't do anything, not one thing, Andrew. Not once in 4 years of dating and however many months of marriage did I give you an actual reason." Her voice was steady in the way voices become steady when the person speaking has moved past a point of no return and knows it. "I was building you something. I was on the phone with your mother at 10 p.m. at night, organizing travel, coordinating food, and you were..." She stopped. "I want you to leave. Megan, please." I want you to leave this house tonight. She turned around. Her eyes were dry, which frightened him more than tears would have. I cannot look at you right now. I cannot hear anything you want to say right now. Please go. He stood slowly. He wanted to tell her that he was sorry in a way that would mean something, not a performed apology, not the desperate kind, but something true and adequate to the scale of what he had done. But he understood, standing in that sitting room with the evening light fading and the sound of Lagos coming through the window, that there was no version of I'm sorry that was adequate to this. Some damage cannot be measured against an apology and come out even. He picked up his keys from the table. At the door, he turned back. Megan had sat back down on the sofa. She had not reopened her laptop. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, very still, looking at nothing in particular. And the sight of her like that, composed, self-contained, already beginning to move through something without him, was the most painful thing he had seen in a long time. I loved you right, she said without looking at him. I want you to know that I loved you right. He stood at the door for a moment. You did, Megan. He left. Outside, the street was the same as it always was. A bus moved past, overcrowded and loud. Somewhere, a phone was playing music from a stall. The air smelt of exhaust and evening food, and the particular sharpness that comes off Lagos just as the sun finishes setting. The city did not pause. It never did. Andrew sat in his car and did not start the engine for a long time. He thought about a rooftop in Lekki Phase 1. He thought about a suya spot in Surulere and the woman who gave him her number without being asked. He thought about a sitting room in Bagada and a gold ring with a single stone. He thought about the word yes, said simply, like the answer to an obvious question. He thought about all the ways a man can be loved exactly right and still manage, through fear and pride and a friend who pointed the wrong direction, to lose it. He started the engine. He drove. Well, that's the end of this story. I hope you guys enjoy it. Don't always jump into conclusions without enough evidence. If Andrew had been your friend, what would you have advised him to do? Don't forget to share because these amazing stories deserve to be shared. And subscribe.